title in story, What Happened with My Stepson, still shocks me. When I look back at the last few years of my life, I sometimes still wonder how everything unfolded the way it did. I never thought I would find myself at the heart of such a deeply emotional and life-changing situation. My name is Emily Carter, and I'm in my early 40s, living in a quiet suburban neighborhood in Ohio. For most of my life, I thought I had it all figured out: marriage, a steady job, and a predictable daily routine. But sometimes, life throws you into unexpected circumstances that test your patience, empathy, and resilience in ways you never imagined. The story begins with my husband, Michael, who had a son from his previous marriage. His name was Ryan. When I first met Ryan, he was a young boy who carried with him a quiet sadness, the kind of heaviness you often see in children whose parents had separated. Over the years, as Michael and I built our own life together, Ryan was always a part of it. I never tried to force myself into the role of a second mother. I knew that bond belonged to his biological mom, but I wanted to be someone he could lean on. As time passed, Ryan grew older, and life presented him with the typical struggles of a young man trying to find his way in the world. He had moments of rebellion, moments of confusion, and long stretches of silence. I always tried to be patient with him, even when I didn't fully understand what he was going through. At first, it was small things: missed curfews, forgotten chores, or withdrawing into his room for hours. Michael, being a busy man with his job that often kept him traveling, sometimes didn't notice the subtle shifts in Ryan's behavior. But I noticed. One evening, I was making dinner when I realized Ryan hadn't come downstairs all day. His car was in the driveway, so I knew he hadn't left the house. I knocked gently on his door, and when he didn't answer, I pushed it open slightly. He was sitting by the window, staring out with an expression that broke my heart. His eyes were clouded with emotions he didn't know how to share. I sat down quietly on the edge of his bed and asked, "Do you want to talk about it?" He shook his head at first, then whispered, "I just don't feel like I belong anywhere." Those words stayed with me. I didn't press him for details that night, but I reassured him that he did belong, that he mattered, and that sometimes, even when the world feels confusing and isolating, there are people who will always stand by you. In the weeks that followed, our bond began to grow in unexpected ways. He started helping me with little things around the house, carrying groceries, fixing the squeaky door hinge, or just keeping me company while I cooked. We had conversations that stretched late into the evening, where he slowly opened up about his struggles with school, friendships, and his uncertain future. He confided in me about the pressure he felt from others to live up to expectations and the guilt he carried about his parents' divorce, even though none of it was his fault. I realized that sometimes, all a person needs is someone who will listen, without judgment, without rushing to solve everything, just listening. Michael was often away on business trips, and during those times, I made sure Ryan never felt alone. We spent weekends gardening, watching movies, or even taking spontaneous drives through the countryside. Slowly, I saw the weight lift from his shoulders, little by little. The turning point came one spring afternoon. I was in the backyard planting flowers when Ryan joined me. He sat down in the dirt with me, ruining his jeans, and we laughed at the mess we made. He looked at me suddenly, with gratitude written all over his face, and said, "I don't know what I'd do without you." That moment still gives me chills because it wasn't dramatic, it wasn't loud, but it was real. It was the sound of a young man acknowledging that someone truly saw him, understood him, and cared about him. Over the years, Ryan grew into a more confident version of himself. He graduated, got a job, and even moved into his own place eventually. But what shocks me to this day is how close we became, not because I tried to replace his mother or because I was perfect, but because I chose to be present. There were moments of hardship, of course. Times when Ryan would relapse into silence, or when Michael would misunderstand his needs. But somehow, Ryan and I had developed a trust that carried us through those storms. I remember vividly the day he told me he had been offered a job out of state. I felt a mix of pride and sadness, knowing he was about to spread his wings. He hugged me tightly before leaving, and with tears in his eyes, he said, "You'll always be my safe place." Even now, those words echo in my heart. Because at the end of the day, life isn't about grand gestures or picture-perfect families. Sometimes it's about the quiet connections, the small acts of kindness, and and the steady presence of someone who refuses to give up on you. What happened between Ryan and me wasn't scandalous, wasn't dramatic in the way some people might assume when they hear a headline. It was something deeper, something human. It was the bond of trust, empathy, and unconditional support. To this day, Ryan still calls me for advice, still stops by on weekends to check in, and still reminds me that the role I played in his life mattered. And that, more than anything, is what continues to shock me, that in simply trying to be kind and understanding, I became someone he could lean on forever. And if there's one lesson I've learned through it all, it's this: never underestimate the power of being there for someone. Sometimes, what seems small in the moment becomes the very thing that changes a person's life.